Welcome everybody, my name is Niklas Huschenbeet and I'm going to take you through the game Wei against Giri from the 6th round of the Bilbao Masters 2016. So, here we have them. Nice little cartoon. You can see they have played against each other twice so far and both games ended in a draw. So not a lot of encounters between them, but of course we can expect many more in the future. Wei pretty much just recently arrived in the World Elite. So Wei playing with the white pieces and started out with e4. And we're getting the famous Berlin endgame. Everybody's always happy to see that. Here we go. Knight f5, queen takes d8, king takes d8, king takes d8. We have arrived in the endgame now. h3. This is a useful move for white to play anyway, because in the future, white would like to mobilize his pawns on the queen side. White has the majority on the queen side. Excuse me, king side. This is the king side. White has the majority there, so he would like to push those pawns forward at some point. h3 is just a useful move to support g4 at some point. Now, there are a lot of ways to play here for black. Among them h5, which is kind of aimed against white's expansion on the king side. Now knight c3, bishop e7, maybe the first slight surprise. Usually here Giri plays king e8, and he has played many games here. But really, bishop e7 doesn't change too much. It could as well transpose later on. The typical line here is bishop f4, bishop e7, rook e1, bishop e6, knight g5, and now rook h6, the way to go. And this has been discussed a lot, even in the World Championship match between Anand and Carlsen. But yeah, it seems that black is holding its own here, his own, and is fine. However, Giri had something else in mind. We'll see this in a moment. Bishop e7, bishop f4. So Wei is just playing the moves white plays anyway in this kind of line. Actually now king e8 transposes to what we just saw. But king c8 is the new move that Giri introduces here and that he had prepared. Wei is still following the standard move here, knight g5, which makes a lot of sense. White is splitting up the bishop pair, and black takes on g5. At this point, rook h6 doesn't make that much sense, because black cannot get this rook into action on a8, which usually is exchanged or at least activated by playing rook d8. So here that wouldn't be possible, and black would be a little bit stuck with the rook on a8. So rather, Giri took on g5, and now plays b6, preparing king b7, c5, king c6, and black has a very stable, solid position. So while black still needs some time to connect the rooks, put his king on b7, where he says, okay, I'm going to strike now and play g4 and implement this plan of pushing the pawns forward on the king side. Takes, now knight h4. Knight h6 wouldn't make much sense here. White just plays f3, stabilize the pawns, and the knight on h6 looks rather stupid. I want to say sad. I think that's a better word. Looks rather sad. So knight h4. Here the knight is being exchanged, and also now white plays f3 and stabilizes the pawns for now. King b7. Now black threatens to do something on the h file, so white has to prevent this by playing king g2, and now rook h1, and all the rooks are being exchanged. And we'll spend the rest of the analysis really extensively looking at this endgame, which is quite interesting. First of all, what's going on? Well, white still has this majority of pawns on the king side, and of course, in some near future, would like to activate them by pushing forward. First, though, the pawn on g4 needs to be protected. That's why white can't play f4 first. And white, by the way, never wants to play g5 unless it's good because that makes his pawns much more difficult to advance. What is black doing on the other hand? Black, well, wants to create some counterplay on the queen side, but he has a double pawn on the c file. And that makes it much more difficult for him to create a passed pawn, right? So generally speaking, white has a tiny bit of an edge here, but chess is very concrete. And here, Giri could have equalized rather easily. In the live commentary, actually, we were speculating whether Giri had prepared this, and we were quite sure that he looked at this endgame, or at least at this particular line, because those are all the natural moves for white. But it seems like he didn't spend too much time on this endgame. Maybe he just saw the computer showing all zeros completely equal, and he didn't look further here, because his next move is a serious mistake, which already just gives white the advantage. c5, so natural, this move by Giri, but it is not the right move in this position. Instead, the atypical move b5 would have been the way to go. Now threatening b4 and picking up this pawn on a2. And the other idea is to quickly bring the king into the center. So white has to cope with this idea of b4. White plays a3 and now king b6 immediately. And b4 wouldn't be a good idea here, because black just plays c5, gets rid of his double pawn. That's always good news. So much more easier for him then to create a passed pawn. And already white has to be careful. Black exchanges on b4, plays c5, and creates even a passed a pawn. That would be quite bad news for the knight. So king g2. And now just king c5. King is coming to d4. White cannot really go f4 here. The black king would be even more active, and that would be too much to handle for white. So king f4 is necessary. And now black can just play a move like a5, and white cannot make any progress here with the king so active on d4. And probably it would be best for white to just repeat moves here by giving checks. And that would be the natural outcome, a draw. In fact, black also might have other options here to go something like king c8, but b5 really is the best way, clearest way. We saw this line, it was pretty much forced, and white cannot do anything. With the c5, however, things are quite different. Now king g2, king c6, and good move here by Wei playing a4. He had to move this pawn anyway, or protect it in some way, because otherwise this knight could never move. The knight is defending the pawn. But by a4, white is not losing any time, because black needs to spend another move on preparing b5. And is doing so by playing a6, which in fact is an inaccuracy, I would say. But already here, and I'm going to repeat this probably a couple of times, the position is already difficult. This is not an easy position to play. It will be some suffering for black in either case. And it seems, yeah, that just wasn't necessary from the start of the endgame. Instead of a6, possibly here king d7. Now king g3, bishop c4, and one idea could be to bring the king to e6, but white can play very precisely here. First playing b3, pushing the bishop back. Bishop has to go to a6 pretty much, and now playing f4, and the point is that now black cannot really play king e6 because of knight b5 hitting both pawns. In another position with the bishop still on c4, black could play c6 here, but now of course that is not possible. White just picks up the bishop, and also the pawn endgame would be just winning for white with the potential passed pawn here on the king side. So instead, after f4, black would need to play differently and would try to defend his position passively somehow, which is not an easy thing to do, and white can really try for a long time. Whenever white gets this f5 in here, he has of course a lot of space already on the king side, and there are always these possibilities to somehow create a passed pawn, which is something black always needs to watch out for. But I think it would have been better than what happened in the game, because black is just not fast enough. It's not creating anything. It seems like more he's creating weaknesses in his own position with this plan of going b5. Again here b5, I'm not sure. Probably the passive defense with bishop d5 would have been best. f4 and bishop h1. But like I said already, this is not a nice position. Not an enjoyable position for black to play. Let's see what Giri did. He played b5, takes, takes, f4, now b4, knight e4, now bishop a2. That's all best moves, but it is really getting black already in a quite dangerous situation. Move to bishop on a2, always at the verge of being locked in by moves like b3, which we'll see in a moment. And from here in, quite interesting, both players are making mistakes in almost every single move. So that just shows how complex this endgame is and how many details there are and subtleties to consider and how many lines to calculate, that even absolute top players like those two are really doing a competition here for who can make more mistakes. Where he plays knight to d2, which makes sense, preparing a move like b3, but king f3 would have been much better. Now if bishop b1, white can just react with c4. No, either way, b takes c3, knight takes c3 is very nice for white, of course. Black is stuck with the c pawns, and white can continue with his play on the king side. And also bishop d3 in this situation, knight d2. Similarly, white will continue. There's no counterplay from black. Just such a great position to just try risk-free and play for a win. In general, this whole endgame must have been just so nice for Wei Yi. He's going in there. He already knows. I'm either going to draw this or I'm going to win. There's just really pretty much no chance I'm going to lose this. So always a pleasant situation to have. Let's go back to this move once again that Wei Yi didn't play. Instead of bishop b1, there's also the option of king d5. And now king e3, c4. And here white can answer with c3 when black cannot take because of knight takes c3 and fork, and black can of course also not play b3. I would just have his bishop locked up completely on a2, of course. So bishop b1 would be necessary, but now black is losing a pawn. But this is the best he can do probably, and if this is the best already, then things are not looking good. Here of course white has good winning chance being a pawn up. Let's return to the game. Knight d2 was played, and here Giri makes a serious mistake, king d5. Instead c4 was absolutely mandatory. Okay, and now white reacts by playing c3. b3 wouldn't be a good choice now because black can just play c3 and then hit the pawn on c2 and activate the king. This is not good for white, but c3. But in this situation, black can put his king on a very nice active square on d5 and then just get the bishop out via b3. That's important to get the bishop out of the prison. King e3, bishop d1. White can still try here, no doubt, but it seems to me that black should have enough resources to hold this actually and should be able to draw. Things are different though after king d5. Here, Wei Yi had an immediate win with b3. Instead he chose c3. Which also looks good, and maybe he thought it doesn't make a big difference, but it absolutely does. b3 locks the bishop in, and I'm sure he considered this, but I don't know what he didn't like about it. So the bishop is locked in, and one key point here maybe is that after king d4, white can play g5, introducing this idea of creating a passed pawn by playing g6 followed by e6. And now, for example, c4, which would be a move after king f3 instead of g5. Here already, of course, simply g6. Just to illustrate this real quick, what I meant here in this position, black can create some counterplay by playing c4, sacrificing a pawn, getting the bishop to b1, where the bishop is more active, and now all black pieces are kind of active and white cannot make any progress. But g5 first is kind of preventing this idea, because now after g6, white can play king f3, and here c4 doesn't work because of the knight takes c4, bishop b1. White can immediately, once again, create a passed pawn, and this passed pawn will queen. So black needs to play something else, but if black can't be active, then the bishop is just locked in on a2, and white has all the time in the world. We'll do some maneuvering here. We'll put black in Zugzwang right here. Here black king needs to move, which allows white to regroup his knight to the best square on the board, which is e3, where the knight controls beautifully the pawn on c2 as well as f5, which otherwise would have been a source of counterplay for black to bring the king in here. But here it's just completely game over. White just collects the pawns. So b3 was a way to get a winning advantage here for white, but where he missed it, played c3. This gives Anish the chance to come back. He took on c3, but here he makes the next mistake. He plays g5. Instead, c4 was absolutely mandatory. And we actually transpose to what we just saw. Once again, the bishop can escape via b3, and black remains in the game and should be able to draw. g5, in general, a good idea to break up this pawn chain here on the king side, but it just concretely doesn't work. But where he misses it, he plays king f3. Instead, c4 check was now winning on the spot once again. The point is that after bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, king takes c4, once again white has this familiar, now already familiar motive of creating a passed pawn. And in this variation, the black e-pawn is in the way for the black king to stop the pawn. So the white pawn will queen. And what else can black do? King e6 will transpose to what we'll actually see in the game. This is also winning for white. And king d4, that was maybe one detail to also check, but shouldn't be too hard for a player of Wei's caliber. e6 once again is the way to go, and here important is though to go to h4, not take the pawn on f4. And why is that? If king takes f4, then black is able to remove the e6 pawn with check, and black is just in time to attack the knight on d2 and then stop the g pawn from queening by taking on c4. Just in time, let's say g6. Of course, this is now winning for black. So that's why at this point the king steps out of the way, f takes e6, g5, and this pawn is unstoppable. King e5, just king h5, and so on and so forth. However, Wei missed this and he played king f3. And here was Giri's last chance. Once again, this move c4 had to be played because the bishop need to get out. Cannot play without your bishop. And here, once again, white can try, white can play on, of course, but this should lead to a draw. Bishop e8 back, knight h7, king e6. White will definitely test this and try this for a while, but there's not a lot of material left, and black has kind of reorganized his pieces. Should be able to draw. But after king e6, now Wei took his chance finally and played c4, locked in the bishop on a2, and that was it. Giri most likely just made one calculation error, and we'll get to this in a moment, but that cost him the game here. G takes f4, king takes f4. Now we get into his pawn. Well, it is, I was about to say pawn game, and it really is a pawn game because the knight and the bishop are neutralizing each other. The knight cannot move because then the bishop would be freed. But in this pawn game, white is up a pawn more or less on the king's side, and this is giving him the winning advantage. Black cannot avoid white from, or prevent white from creating a passed pawn of c6, or it's just g5, king f5 and e6, and we'll have something similar as in the game. So in the game, Giri played f6, takes, g5 check, king g6, king g4, king h7. Here in the broadcast, g6 was played, or shown, not played, because g6 was surely not played. That would just give away the pawn. So let's just move a little bit differently, so we don't have this little arrow in there. Now we get to this position, and here what we thought in the live commentary is that Giri only considered king f6, which is the most natural way to go about this, right? And here black would be okay, because in this position he could just give up his bishop and it would be a stalemate. The problem though is that after king g8, now where am I? After king g8, white can go via h6, and that's what he did. And here Anish Giri resigned. The point is that after king h8, now white can play g7 and doesn't play king g6, but simply knight e4 and knight f6, and white is queening and winning. Winning by queening. Standard rule. So here Giri resigned, and Wei scored his first win in a tournament. Quite an unfortunate endgame for Giri. He prepared this new variation with king c8, and it seems to hold up. But it seems that he just didn't look deeply enough into his endgame, played the most natural move maybe. c5 is so often the most logical natural move in all these Berlin endgames. But in that particular situation, it was not the best move. And then he found himself in an unpleasant situation already. And then after a couple of mistakes from both sides, Giri made the last one, missed his chance to get the bishop out by playing c4 himself, allowed white to play c4, lock in the bishop on a2, and then was just all game over. All right, that puts Giri on -1 and Wei back on 50%. 4 more rounds to go. Tomorrow is the next round at 4 p.m. German time, or I should probably rather say Central European Standard Time, Daylight Time, I don't know. Same time as today with youngest son and myself. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Goodbye.